So, hello, everybody, and welcome. We're so glad to be in community with you today for this wonderful event with Christabel and Tania, two of our favorite humans doing such amazing, fascinating, interesting, needed work in their respective fields. So, thanks for being here for this conversation. If we haven't met before, hello, how are you? My name is Claire Byrne. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Community Manager for RSA US. I'm joining you from the Cowichan Valley in Vancouver Island, the traditional lands and unceded territory of the Quitsin people. So if you haven't already, I know I've said this probably about 5 times already, but you feel free to introduce yourself in the chat so we get a sense of who is with us today in the virtual rooms, and you can introduce yourself in whatever way you're comfortable doing so. We will be recording today's session, so no stress, no pressure. If you miss something or the chat is absolutely popping off and you miss a link that's been shared, we will be sending a recording along with some various links in a follow-up email probably in the next 24 to 48 hours. So don't worry if you miss anything. And Zoom is interactive, so feel free to use that as you see fit. We have chat that's usually super busy in our events. DMs are always open for myself and Tony, a wonderful colleague who's here with me today. And you can use reactions. You can go hard on the love hearts and the celebrations, whatever suits you as we're chatting away. And feel free to send me a DM with any question because no question is a silly question. And I'm here to support you all in the next 60 minutes or so. So those of you who have attended virtual events with us before, then you know we like to start our gatherings with a kind of connection prompt and a way to get to know each other and ground us in the topic that we're here to explore today. So Tony will pop that in the chat today or in the chat box for you to look at. Just how are you arriving today? There's a lot to dig into in this topic, and often our days are pretty stacked with meetings and events and gatherings. So, how are you arriving at this in this moment? And before we jump in to our conversation, we'll just give a little background on RSA US and cover some of our ground rules, for want of a better word, for our conversation today. So, for those of you who are new to the RSA, here's a little bit more about our work in the world. We are a global civic membership organization that unites people and ideas to solve the challenges of our time. Our roots trace back to Enlightenment era coffeehouse culture, where people gathered to exchange ideas, challenge the status quo, and reimagine new possibilities. Since then, our work has continually evolved to meet the needs of each era and support progress across industries, sectors, and communities. In the US, we are a 501(c)(3) affiliate of the RSA, housed in London, a social change organization founded in London on the belief that private citizens can come together to improve society. And we leverage our whopper 270-year-old history rooted in creativity, connection, and innovation, while constantly staying nimble and entrepreneurial in our approach. And our team is small, but we are mighty. Myself, Tony, who's here with us today, Alexa, and Emily. And we leverage the best of this 270-year lineage and support about our 1,300 or so fellows across the US to mobilize change through collaboration, shared learning, and relationships. There's a lot more that I could say about who we are and what we do. My inbox is open. I'll pop my email in the chat if anyone ever wants to chat to me more about who we are and what we do. But on that, I'll pass over to my colleague Tony, who will just talk us through some of our the ways that we want to show up for this next bit of time together. So thanks for listening to me, and over to you, Tony.
Thanks so much, Claire. Hi, everyone. My name is Toni Showala. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Senior Connection, Culture, and Operations Lead at RSA US. I've been with the team for about 3 years, and a lot of the focus of my work has been on our social connections work. As Claire mentioned, in addition to intentionally curating the content of events that we support, we're always aspiring to show up in ways that will facilitate inclusive, safe, authentic, collaborative, respectful, kind spaces, which promote learning and support our shared purpose. So to solidify this listed on the screen, we have a series of ways that we are aspiring to and committed to showing up. Please take a moment, take a look at them, make sure that you're in agreement with caring for yourself and one another in these ways. We're always open to refining these. So if any of them stand out to you a lot, or if there's anything that you have as far as suggestions, please pop those in the chat. Always grateful to make these even better. And if you need anything at all, feel free to send me a message in the chat. I'm here to help. And with that, I will pass it back over.
Thanks, Tony. And I just wanted to spend just 2 quick minutes, which I'm not going to do either of our speakers justice by trying to introduce you both in 2 minutes. But here we are. Where are your faces so that I can spotlight you for everybody? Tania and Christabel, welcome. For those of you who are not familiar with Tania and Christabel, you are in for a treat. So Christabel Nsiah-Buadi is an executive strategist and the founder of Your Podcast Pipeline, a narrative development coaching program for thought leaders, journalists, creative founders, and public speakers seeking to amplify their mission and message through audio and embrace their voice. Christabel, once described as an empowering creative who listens powerfully, possesses a gift and passion for distilling big, complex ideas into their core truth and meaning, and she leverages this ability to shape shows, develop concepts, and build connections through storytelling. Before this, she built and led a creator accelerator program at Spotify, including the renowned Sound Up Behind the Mic production accelerator. And as a journalist, she's worked across 3 continents, leading breaking news teams and hosting shows for networks like NPR, the BBC, and American Public Media. Her writing has appeared in The Independent and British Vogue, and she has appeared on ABC News. So welcome, Christabel. And Tania Duarte, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Tania, but please just correct me if not, is the founder of We and AI and works on critical AI literacy, the decoding of narratives related to AI hype, AI inevitability, and the use of AI metaphors. We and AI run the global Better Images of AI stock image library and resource and work with civil society organizations around the world. And we'll pop those links in the chat if you want to check them out. She's on the founding editorial board of the AI and Ethics Journal, the editorial board of the RSA Journal, and she is a lead for TLA Tech for Disability. Tania coordinated the definitions group for the IEEE P7 7015 Standard for Data and AI Literacy Skills and Readiness, and you can tell us more about that. Was on the Public Engagement and Ecosystem Strategy Advisory Board of the Alan Turing Institute, and she's named one of 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics in 2021 and one of Computer Weekly's 20 Most Influential Women in UK Tech in 2025. Phew, okay, those are some amazing bios. Thanks for being here. Over to you, Christabel. Take us
Thank
away.
you, Tanya. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Listen, everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to be talking to you guys about this topic. You're going to be hearing more about it. I want to say that this is the first. I'm extra excited. Before we got on the call, people were like, "Okay, you don't have to be that excited." But I genuinely am. I am very excited because this is the first in a series of conversations that I'm having with the Royal Society of the Arts. I'm going to be using this space to really talk about how content can inspire action for change. You heard earlier about what the RSA is about, and so these are the kind of topics that I'm going to be exploring in these live conversations. And from a storytelling perspective, I'm thinking about how we can use storytelling critically, how we can critically think about the stories that we tell, the tools we use to tell them, which is why we're here today, and how we do that work ethically and meaningfully. And so this series really is about amplifying the thinkers and finding new collaborative ways to help creatives thrive. And so moving on to this particular episode, this is why we're here today. We're talking about AI. Everybody is talking about AI, but I believe that we're talking about it in a different way. I'm going to say that I was really excited to meet Tania, who you heard that incredible introduction from. And I was very excited when I heard that I was going to be able to speak to her today, because writers, thinkers, and people who rely on the human process to make others think or feel differently, we're often conflicted, right? Should we use it at all? What are the ethical implications? And in a world where the dominant narrative is adopt or fall behind, do we really have to accept that? And that's why I wanted to speak to Tania today, because I think here's what's interesting, right? I saw this, it came out in April, I believe, right? A Gallup poll found that Gen Z isn't convinced that AI will not enhance their critical thinking. In fact, most of them think that it could negatively impact their learning. So the people are pushing back. And as I thought when I was reading that, I was like, the kids were right. They might actually save us in the end, right? They just need the language to use it. And Tania is the person who can help us shape that language. This is where she comes in. We mentioned that she's the founder of We and AI. And I'm really excited to get into what Tania is observing about the landscape, about behavior, and about the ways we can hold onto our agency in these very, very quickly moving and shifting times. And so I'm going to be talking to her because I really believe that she's going to help us explore ways that we can walk away by the end of this session feeling a little more in control of what's coming down the pike or where we are today. So Tania, how are you doing? Thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for that intro. I'm actually the one that's really honoured to be here. Team RSA US are amazing. And this was so well organised. It was organised a couple of months, maybe 3, like it was a long time down the pipeline for me. But it shows how ahead I think how ahead that certainly Christabel and the team were, because since we booked that, there has been much more going on in the kind of area that we're discussing. So yeah, kind of big up for really being ahead of that narrative to a certain extent. And yeah, Christabel really, also helped kind of shape a bit of the ways that we can think about creatives and how they respond to, how AI is showing up in their lives. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No worries, and not just creators. I think broadly as well, because even though this it's been billed as a conversation for creators, I think in every aspect of our lives, I talked about kids or students or I call them kids, but that's because I'm not 25. Like the ways they're engaging with it. In fact, my own daughter, who's a teenager, I remember watching her use. I didn't watch her actually. I was alarmed when she said that she was using ChatGPT for her homework, and I freaked out. And I was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And she was like, "I'm just testing myself, Mum." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, I'm creating prompts to test myself." And I said, "So you're not using it for your essays, are you?" And she was like, "No, why would I do that? That's really..." I'm quoting her when I say this, like, "That's really dumb." And she looked at me like that, like, "Of course not." And that gave me so much hope, because what that said was that the narrative has been AI or die, essentially, right? And it's the future, and it's going to tell us everything that we need to do, and everyone's freaking out. And that's not necessarily what you say, Tania. What you talk about is, no, we need to understand what it is. We need to understand the language of AI, which until I talked to you, I thought, I think I kind of understand it. And then you really broke a few things down for me, and we'll get into that. And I was like, oh, I didn't understand that at all. And I'm less freaked out. And then once we understand that language, we can really start to figure out what our relationship is to it and the ways in which we can engage with it, right? So when I think about all of that, tell me a little bit about what you mean by the language of AI and what we don't or did understand about it, as briefly as you can.
So to start with, AI is a stupid term.
There you go.
That means both everything and nothing all at once. So the very first kind of step is actually to just think about what we even mean when we say AI, and is what I mean the same as what you mean and the same as the next person. And it's kind of the very term was invented as a marketing term back in the 50s, 60s, and at the time there were other terms that existed, expert systems or cybernetics or whatever, but they weren't sexy enough to get the funding, the research funding. So from the very inception, artificial intelligence has been a bit of spin. And it's changed, kind of perception over the decades, but it still is very much a marketing term. But now it's one that is hiding a lot of things. So there's a really great analogy in a book called AI Snake Oil by Kapoor and Narayanan that says, imagine if when we talked about vehicles, we never broke down what kind of vehicle we meant. So I always think, you could be talking about a moon buggy or a Range Rover, or you could be talking about a milk float or a scooter, but we don't say which one it is that we're talking about. And that's where we are right now with AI, that we could be talking about, you know, a number of different technologies, and quite often people don't really know what it is. But on top of that, even aside from talking about the actual technologies, the term actually can mean many other things that are not even related to fields of research or to technologies. Some people see it as an ideology. You know, the kind of the project AI, the project of embedding, you know, datafication and automation in everything, for ideological purposes of, you know, kind of power or surveillance or, you know, whatever it is. So there are also ways that are not technical to think about AI. People talk about it as a diagnostic tool to like surface the things that are important in societies. You know, is it productivity? Is it efficiency? You know, or, you know, do we all buy into that? So, yes, so there are so many different ways. Ultimately, you know, a lot of the time it's a buzzword for VC funding.
Hold on, pause.
Yeah.
Because and I mean this in the best way. You got me when you said, well, first of all, the 1950s and 60s. I wrote that down. I was like, damn, we all really think that it just like came out of nowhere like 5 years ago, and you're like, it's existed since the 1950s and 60s. Scary, number one. But also you said, I guess what I'm hearing from you is that we're not even on the same page when it comes to talking about it, right? So in other words, you said that there are different ways in which we can talk about this. And the reason why I cut you up abruptly is because I was like, we literally are not even on the same, we're not speaking the same language. Because even when I first talked to you initially, I remember you saying that, I came to you and I said, there was somebody who'd said to me, please stop using AI. And they had sent it to me on Instagram. And I remember thinking, AI isn't that a platform that uses AI, for example, right? And that got me thinking that we really don't understand, you know, what we're talking about. So when we are talking about it specifically to the layperson, to me, what would we be talking about?
So there's no like, there's 100 different definitions.
Oh my gosh.
And I would say that they all serve a certain agenda. So you've got the OECD, which, you know, will have one. You've got the UN, UNESCO, you know, governments, etc. And some of them will focus on the system, so define like a certain group of like algorithmic systems or, you know, automated systems. Some will focus more on individual technologies, so say, well, computer vision, speech recognition, you know, pattern recognition, you know, so kind of group together technologies. Others are more research focused. So it depends a little bit on who's doing the defining and why. So anyone can come up with a definition for their organization or their work. The ones I would steer clear of are the ones that say AI is a group of kind of processes that previously required human intelligence. So this is like quite a lot of dictionary definitions, like, well, things that like replicate human intelligence. Now, the problem with that definition is that neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, you name it, cannot define human intelligence, right? Like, who understands human intelligence? The scientists don't understand human intelligence. So when we describe one thing that is hard to understand in relation to another thing that nobody understands, like how have we really explained anything, right? That it means nothing. And what it does do is it means that people kind of go, okay, so it's like humans, like it's intelligent and it's like humans, but it's not. A lot of it is not intelligent. It's prediction or pattern recognition. It's really, really good. You know, it's systems that are really, really good at analyzing, spotting patterns, you know, making predictions in large amounts of data. And when you get to generative AI, they're very, very good at kind of pulling that together to then, you know, kind of generate content from those patterns that they found. So that's kind of it. These days, when people talk about AI, they're often talking about generative AI. So ChatGPT launched in 2023. Yeah. Quite often that's what they're talking about. But, you know, there's decades, as I said, since 1956. There's been, you know, work on, you know, kind of expert systems. So there was a time when people were more working on, you know, replicating rules-based, you know, rules-based system that you input the rules in and they kind of followed them. Then it was moving on, although there are still, you kind of can call it symbolic AI, there are still people working in that field. And the thing is, those kinds of fields, like, no one talks about them, but they still exist. There are still people working on this because generative AI has come to the forefront. But that comes from a lot of research on kind of neural networks. You'll start to notice the language. We've talked about intelligence, human intelligence. Now we're talking about neural networks. And it was inspired by neural networks in the brain, but it's very different. So quite often, but you can see the language starting to creep in of like comparing to human intelligence. And that's what, the basis of what we might call, machine learning. And that becomes more about, various ways of spotting patterns through data rather than coding in rules.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because, there are a variety of things, but the thing I think about a lot is that the people that I talk to who are using it, you start to, I can't say the word anthropomologize, so I'm going to say humanize. I think you'll know what I mean. Like I won't say, but we all give the AI a name, and we'll kind of laugh about it. But I think when I think about that behind the scenes, really what we're trying to grapple with our relationship with this generative AI, which is really, I'd like to talk about within this space of this conversation. Let's focus on generative, because I think that's what a lot of people are dealing with, right? Trying to grapple with the awe of this technology that we found, that we're being told we have to. It's like when people, when the car came onto the scene, everybody thought, no, they're evil. They're kind of trying to say that if you resist that, so to speak, then somehow you're being a bit of a Luddite. But you can see that we are grappling as human beings with what this thing is, because we don't know what it is. So can you tell me more about the ways in which in the past, even up to today, we've used that as a technique to try and get a hold of our relationship to AI, or not at all?
In terms of anthropomorphism,
there you go. You see, you can say it. Don't show off now.
I say it quite a lot, to be fair.
No, it's all good.
I don't always manage it, but I do.
But you know what I mean? And
quite a lot.
And can I add to that as well? I think the other, as I'm listening to you, what I'm also thinking is that, when I think about the scraping of the internet and the stuff that we've put on there, right, I think there's a question around the responsibility that we have, or the role that we have played by putting all of our data in, right? And then, like, this is ours. We've created this, and now we kind of don't know what to do with it. And I think trying to name it is part of our, I don't know, the human way of being like, no, I know what it is, but I don't know what it is. Oh, it's got 8 legs. Is it a spider? No, it's my friend, Claudette.
So lots of, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer all of that, but no, to pick up on a few things, and a great comment in the chat that I acted as though AI has been around only since 1956, and actually we've had these like very complex relationships with the idea of autonomy, throughout from mythological times, and actually in 1956 is like starting AI is a very Western-centric perspective. Just to acknowledge that this ties into thank you. This ties into the anthropomorphism because it speaks to the human wish to and the nature of kind of to think about the relationship between people and machines and things that are like that, and that goes back to mythological times. The term AI arose in 1956, but actually it's just a term for a kind of discourse we've been having about machines, for forever. And you then mentioned the term Luddite, which I'd also like to pick up on as language before I get
Please
back.
Please do. It's 100% language, and I used it on purpose for that reason.
Before I get back to anthropomorphism, because what we're seeing at the moment is this kind of reclaiming of the term Luddite, because it has been used pejoratively for some time. It's like, oh, you're technophobic, you're like,
you're backwards.
you're backwards basically, whereas actually the term came from the time of the Industrial Revolution. I think kind of 1811 or something it was a peak year. Ned Ludd himself, which was a mythological figure, actually.
Yeah.
There was no actual Ned Ludd. It became like a name for like an everyman who was resisting not the technology. Actually, a lot of the Luddites who were pushing back against automation in kind of weaving and textile industry.
Yeah.
Were actually pushing back against the kind of extractive mood towards factory manufacturing, which came with decreased living standards, decreased control. You couldn't just work as your own, your own boss in your house doing your artisan stuff. You had to go and, get your arms chopped off by machines and child labor in factories. So, what they were pushing back on was not the technology. It was actually the systems that came around it. So that's kind of being reclaimed. So again, that speaks to the fact that this is not a new situation that we are in.
Sounds very familiar,
like
actually.
The history of technology. What is, I think, new is the fact that the tendency we have to kind of ascribe human characteristics to inanimate objects. Well, sometimes they're animate, like even our pets or whatever, has been really, really played on by the fact that generative AI is trained on our data, as you said. And because of that, it is basically engineered to sound like us, to mirror us back to ourselves, to kind of be deceptively human. And so we already have this innate tendency to ascribe human attributes. Now it's like supercharged because not only do the tools, write, speak, sound, deceptively human, but the way that the companies promote them and market them are made so that we believe that they have human names. They are called things like co-pilots or assistants. They speak in the first person. There's no reason why, absolutely no reason why a chatbot needs to say, as a large language model, I think. There's no reason it needs to say thinking while it's processing a function and you're waiting for it. This is a very deceptive way. It's in the design intent to make us believe that it is human. So no surprise that then, we think it is our colleague, our co-worker, our friend. You have people having these, parasocial relationships that, have ended up in, suicides and mental health issues and over dependency, and the amount of research on, kind of cognitive offloading, cognitive surrender, just kind of it is absolutely phenomenal. I could talk for went for hours. So anthropomorphism is the biggest challenge. The other thing to say about it is that it hides the agency of the humans doing this. So if you're looking at, the machine, AI is going to take our jobs, AI is taking, newsflash, AI has never taken a single job. People decide to automate. And when we call everything AI and blame the AI, what we're not doing is calling to account the people. We're not seeing the role we have in deciding that automation is the way to go, and like asking, well, who does automation benefit? Who is this for? Like, what's the benefit of this? Who's making the money from it? We're not asking that because we're scared. We're thinking it's this thing called AI that's inevitable. And a conversation that we kind of had earlier, so I will finish on this, was about this kind of narrative of like this inexorable progress that AI is part of progress that shouldn't be stopped, even if it could. It can't because resistance is futile. But even if it could, it shouldn't. And there's a lot of people propagating that at the moment. Very successfully. We've just seen the SpaceX IPO, which is insane. Won't have time to talk about that, but if anyone wants to find out more about
another conversation, we'll see if we can figure that out. Yep.
But the thing about that is the idea that these kind of big brains in, Silicon Valley are, smarter than everyone, and that technology is the answer to everything. And that's now being borne out by the fact that, we think these tools are amazing because it can write a poem in the style of, kind of Jay-Z, talking about Shakespeare, or, whatever it is, that we think they're amazing, or we're promised that they're going to cure cancer or whatever. I'm still waiting for that. In fact, we've been able to cure malaria for, decades, but guess what? That hasn't happened. Maybe the technology is not the problem. Anyway, I'll get to my point. The technology progress is not actually the thing that has changed. You needed three things for the boom in generative AI. You needed compute and progress in compute. So this is like the computational power. And there was a significant increase in chips. So this is where NVIDIA is, coining it at the moment, because the chips did get better. So you were able to perform more functions. That was part of the progress. Yes, there have been big increases in that. You needed better models, so better AI models. Yes, the models got better, but actually I talked before about the fact that machine learning has been, around for some time, neural networks, deep learning, etc. The models got better, but they weren't like a new thing. It wasn't like we've invented this like brand new way of it. It was actually the third thing that made the biggest difference, which is the data. So we needed the internet with everyone's social media. We needed all of this data to train the machine, the model, with this greater compute. Now, in order for us to have the data, we didn't just need the internet. We needed collectively to agree that it's okay for big tech companies to steal the internet. So actually the breakthrough in technology was not necessarily just about the big brains in Silicon Valley. It was about us culturally, society, government saying, yes, you can do what you want. You can take all of the stuff we've ever produced in the internet and you can use it for your models. And that's why when people say, things are inevitable, it's like, these are all decisions that we have made. We have all collectively made decisions to get here, but we can all make different decisions.
Right. So before we get there, and Barbary, I'm going to ask your question. Believe me, I'm going to get there. But before we get there, just to remind us, how did we say, yes, you can steal the internet? What did we do?
What did we do? So I think, there are many amazing historians and writers that will go into this in some detail. There's also there's a book called Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, used to work at Facebook, which is a really interesting insider story of back in the kind of early 2010s of what was going on at Facebook. You've got people like Varoufakis, can't remember his first name, who has written a book called Techno Feudalism, who kind of talks a lot about the politics of this. So there are different, I defer to kind of experts on this, but I would say that it probably comes a little bit, my personal view, from the financial crash in 2008. And post-financial crash, it was like, oh, those business models didn't work. Capitalism is not working so well. We've got these saviors here in the big tech giant who are going to come and they're going to democratize everything. And I was part of that, really believing in this idea of new business models and shaking things up and democratizing. And I think, Obama, kind of really opened the doors for Zuckerberg and, everyone to come in and go, oh, you're going to now save our, kind of economy. You're the kind of nerdy guys that have got hope. And they sold this kind of idea of democratization and, us all being able to have it and social media. And we kind of fell for that. And so what I feel, is really important is what we learned from social media is actually all our hopes for like this kind of flourishing that we would all have by being connected and, having to your individual needs and kind of wants and the personalization and the human that hasn't worked out so well. We have nudify apps, kind of creating porn and children. We have slop that is like causing division. We have algorithms that you have slop that's like polluting our information integrity. We have algorithms that are causing division. It hasn't worked out so well. And so I feel really strongly that like we have to learn from that. So we let that happen, maybe because we had this belief that like it was going to be great. We know better now. We may have had an excuse with social media. There's no excuse now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to run through. I told you, look, I got all these questions gone because there's a bunch of excellent questions here that I want to ask before we get to the solutions, because I want to, we created the mess, but we can control it. Basically, what you're saying is we are in control, right? But Barbary asked, and this is something that was on my mind, right? Often now, when people I know are resisting it, they're resisting the AI that is an environmental threat, aka data centers and water usage. And they see the recent ChatGPT models as a cause of that danger. Oh, that's not a question, but it was a point. But I would like you to speak on that, because I think there's a tension there. Because on one hand, you've got people who are wanting to use these tools that can help them grow. Like I've mentioned before, women, for example, they've been, everyone's losing their jobs, right? Not because of the tech, but because of the people, right? Women have been significantly impacted. Again, everybody has, but the numbers for women are quite alarming, right? But you also see them starting their own businesses, and they're using these tools to start their own business. I remember reading someone had talked about the fact that she's a solopreneur and she joined Circle, for example, and now Circle means that has allowed her to focus on the things she's building, the content, because Circle does the job of 5 people as opposed to just doing the job of 1, right? So has a benefit for her. But on the other hand, there are people far, far away who are not benefiting from that. Like they're being hurt by that because of where they live, because of data centers. So how that tension there, I think, really needs to be addressed. And I'm yet to hear, I'm sure there is someone who's written about it, but how do we deal with that tension of I'm trying to build something, but there's someone on the other side of the country even, or other side of town, let alone the world, who is really not benefiting from the thing that I'm doing?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, and everyone here, and certainly looking at the chat has already taken this step, is to, learn more about AI in terms of the whole supply chain, the value chain, the kind of life cycle, and not just like the little prompt you type in and get the cool graphic. That may well help you, that may well be really transformational for you. So the first thing is to be aware, right? And to make other people aware. And, we do a lot of work on that, because everyone's going to make their own choices about how they respond to that. But if you don't know, and it is incredible how many people don't know, then that choice is taken away from you. So, the first thing is kind of calling out is learning more and educating, yourself and people about that. And I think most people have taken that journey here, but it's helping other people too. How you then respond to that. So we talked about data centers. There's more and more going on with data center resistance now. Sometimes people are resisting it because they are aware of the environmental impact. That could be the local environmental impact. It could be, the water, but the water consumption, it could be the pollution. You've seen, was it AOC going into Congress with like a bottle of brown water, that what it's done. So people are becoming more aware of this. But also I think data centers have become a focal point for people that are actually protesting, like them, as they've become a locus for a physical manifestation of the less physical things that don't feel right to them about AI. So they kind of like, it's not necessarily like, oh, well, it's okay because I don't have a data center in my backyard, so like, what does it matter to me? It's actually like, these are the manifestations of a system that isn't working for us. Inequalities increasing, the gap between the rich and the poor, again, SpaceX IPO massively increasing, division is increasing. this is, this is one of the reasons why. So there are lots of people, though, that do not want to and not able to, actively resist like that, or can't see the connection. So to try and answer or say how we approached answering your question of like, how do you make your own decision? What we found is that a lot of people who were concerned were arguing with each other about the best way to do this. So you get artists that are like, never use generative AI, don't use generative AI. It's data theft, it's extractive, also it's slop. It's kind of, just lessening like the human imagination. It's decreasing our ability to use our creativity. Never use it. Then you get artists that are like, well, actually, hey, like I'm experimenting with this and it's teaching me about, how to understand AI. It's enabling me to create work that kind of reimagines stuff. So and these people will argue with each other, right? And there'll be like quite heated debates. Similar with, use of AI in education. If someone needs help with assistive technology, like they end up arguing with someone that's like, ed tech is fundamentally, destroying education or whatever it is. And what we were trying to say is like, the thing is, all of these things can be true at the same time. But while we're arguing with each other, what we're not doing is pushing back collectively.
Right.
Against the kind of system that allows trillionaires and kind of thinks that we must put tech in everything. For someone in the chat earlier said for profit. You asked about creativity. Is generative AI to flatten everything and kind of monetize your creativity for profit? Yes. So but the point is that while we're debating this, we're with each other, we're not pushing back. So we created a framework, countering inevitability framework, where we did some research and looked at 4 different ways that people were, pushing back. And some of them may feel very uncomfortable for others. But we want to say, hey, you're actually all part of the same fight, even if you feel very uncomfortable about it. Or some of them may be doing different things in different parts of their life. So we mentioned like the difference between being, maybe a small business owner versus being a parent, or, kind of versus being a creator. Like we hold many different relationships with AI. So you can approach different ones depending, you might, depending on what you can do. And the 4 things that we identified were that, as kind of bucket strategies that were people doing were resisting AI. So you see a lot of like data center resistance. This is the resistance of like, unregulated big tech power and the datification of everything. And they make a lot of links to increasing fascism and that this kind of thing around the world. Kind of very intolerance, etc. And there is a lot of work that makes links between algorithmic decision making, and eugenics, for example. There are there's a lot written on that. So that's a kind of resistance people that are kind of quite hardcore, like actually do we even want AI? And then you have refusers that are people that do more targeted resistance. So this could be like, hey, I don't want facial recognition surveying me the whole time. It could be like, I don't want generative AI, on my feed or, in my work. It could be people that are, kind of this ed tech tool is actually, it may be there for assistive technology, but actually that's only because we've stopped funding the people that actually can assist that person themselves. So you get this a lot in healthcare. It's like, hey, poor people can have an AI doctor, so we don't need to provide for them anymore because they can have the AI version. So there are people that push back on individual things, like very targeted. Then and there's overlaps. The point is it's a Venn diagram. That's the thing I haven't said. All of this is a Venn diagram. then you get to reclaiming. And these are people that are much more like, hey, these tools exist. I'm not going to I don't want to be abolitionist, but like, how can we use them for our advantage? How can we create our own models? Maybe we can own the data. Maybe we can have a data co-op. Maybe we can build a small language model that has, our own language, curated by us in it. Maybe we can, use them. Someone talked in the chat about AI for good. And I'm also very skeptical of AI for good, because it's like, AI for who's good and who decides and the rest of it. But there are
Wow.
organizations that, are trying to say, well, maybe we can have AI for good if it's not the big tech AI, if it's technology we decide and we build. So that's the kind of reclaiming people. And then you've got reimagining. And reimagining is really inspired by Ruha Benjamin, who's done there's a book I highly recommend, Imagination, a manifesto, who makes a really great point. I'll see if I can get the exact quote, because I usually completely butcher it, which is that we must remember to imagine and craft worlds. Remember to imagine and craft the worlds you cannot live without, just as you dismantle the ones you cannot live within. And this is a really important part for me, because it feels like resistance is very far away from reimagining. Like reimagining feels like, oh, this is really lovely. Let's think about the world we want to live in. But actually, a lot of people that are resisting, who are seen as very negative, and anti-AI and anti-technology and kind of grumpy, actually they're very optimistic, because what they're saying is things can be better than this. So there is kind of, the fact that this is a Venn diagram that moves around in a circle, there is that link between, while we're thinking about what we don't want, there's this kind of big work going on in terms of thinking, well, what is public good, and what do we want, and what world do we want to inhabit? And I think the failure of that narrative, we've had some populist narratives that have really picked up steam all over the world. But what's that other narrative of the world that we want to inhabit?
We sadly, I can't believe it, we've got less than 10 minutes left, but you have given us your frameworks of the different ways in which we can interact. What would you recommend? Someone asked, do you believe that in the case of AI generated text, and forgive me if I misread this, from the internet to various disciplines, will create gradually an opposite effect and bring forward the need for people who write without the use of AI? I think it's tangential, but I think it's a really important question. Answer that question, and I'll, if we have time, I'll try and explain to you why I asked that question now.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing that companies that have gone all in on AI are going, oh, actually,
maybe not. Yep.
This is causing us lots of problems, because we're having to, sort out the mess, whether it's agentic AI or whether it is, AI content, it's causing a lot of mess, right? Because guess what? It's not actually a human. It's not actually a smart graduate. When it hallucinates, it's not actually a bug that can be fixed. It's a feature. A hallucination is an example of a kind of narrative that is anthropomorphic narrative that is minimizing the fact that it's trying to make out that it's an error, right? So if a language model creates something that is factually incorrect, it's hallucinating. It's now, when you and I hallucinate, it could be because we've taken too many drugs, or because we're really ill, or because we're having a kind of episode. But when a large language model comes up with something that we call a hallucination, it's neither wrong nor right. We say whether we can see that it matches objective reality or not. It's actually just predicting the next token. It is always right at predicting the next token, because it's following its,
But it requires us to do it. Vered said something really interesting here, which I think ties to, and it ties to the beginning of the conversation, which is that human beings first. If it can't work without us. And what Vered said was, what is it about us as us as people that we increasingly prefer to talk to a robot over an expert fellow human. And I think it goes back to something that you had said earlier in terms of like, I think you mentioned the pandemic. Can you speak a little bit to that as well? You know, like, is there a way in which we can resist in that way by working together? Because I think it is humans. I think ultimately the way we maintain our agency comes to us first.
Yeah, agency is such a good word, and you did begin with agency, and that's like something that, you know, we have, and that when we have these kind of narratives of like, hey, there's nothing you do, horse is bolted, cat's out the bag, you know, train has left the station, you just got to get on it and, you know, try and grab your seat and the rest of it. It's all about eroding our agency. It's all about making us feel that we can't do that. So reclaiming agency, and the previous question was about, you know, valuing human stuff more. And I think I was saying, well, we're starting to see that. And actually, you're seeing more and more movements now crop up that are like the number of zine making projects that are around at the moment is phenomenal. There's been this flourishing of making zines. So this is like really, you know, Luddite kind of, you know, printing, you know, writing and drawing non-digital stuff, and, you know, completely not even using any technology, and the rest of it is showing that people are returning to that. And zine making is actually one of the strategies. So I'm now going to talk about another project that I should have spent longer talking about, because this highlights how people are reclaiming agency. So the fact that people are asking lots of these questions, like, what can I do? And, you know, well, I can't do anything because, like, what can you do? And we're like, no, there are people doing things. We, a group of lots of activists, researchers, journalists, were all working on this problem. And Karen Howe, who's an amazing journalist who wrote a book called Empire of AI, which I thoroughly recommend, throughout her interviews kind of felt like that people needed to, you know, as a journalistic endeavour, we needed to surface these things that people are doing to reclaim agency, because nothing's inevitable, right? Apart from, you know, maybe weather, and even that seems to be influencing, you know, quite a lot. So it's a question of like getting people to see the inspiration, so we were working on a project based on building a database on our framework. Karen and the DARE Institute, which is an amazing institute in the US run by Timney Gebru, and the Refugee Law Lab out of York University in Canada. We were all working on like trying to build these databases of, you know, kind of, and we all came together when we saw we were doing the same thing to launch something called the AI Resist List. So it's airesistlist.org or .com. And we went through this like really in-depth, careful, non-AI project of like reaching out to people across the world within communities, you know, Global South, you know, really focusing on that to see the different ways in which people are reclaiming AI agency. And within the website, there are actually 7 pillars. So you've got the 4 like R's, and then there's kind of 7 pillars. So I don't have time to go through them now, but within the 7 pillars, which include things like, you know, data, narrative, resource, surveillance, etc., there's then a breakdown of different actions that people are taking with an example of an initiative. And there are many, many, many of them. So what our aim is that people can take inspiration from that. We want to continue to build out that resource. You know, we're thinking now about regrouping for a phase 2 where it's not just this like snapshot, but we're thinking about moving forward. How might that be a you know, a kind of community resource for people? We've got a website that we were going to build our database on called notinevitable.ai. That is like something we want to we want to talk about having, you know, kind of community blog posts and explorations and stuff like that. So I think building community, learning what's been done. And I've got, I'm
so sad because we have like 2 minutes and I'm like, but we have, 2 minutes, but this is all incredible. Before we go, if you can, what's the one thing we can do today when we move forward? And I think there's been a request for another hour. So we'll see. We'll figure that out, because there's plenty more questions that I have to ask. especially around like cultural sovereignty. But what's the one thing we can do?
Right. So this is coming back to your question of like, how do we individually, and I've got
Yeah.
no answer, like what, like, I'm not going to tell any one of you don't use AI or use it like this or protest this or, fight this. But it's about finding the things that you can do and always asking the question. So, we've talked about language. Be careful of how you're picking up on these narratives of like, revolution, democratization, abundance, the things that creep into our language. But as well as avoiding them, it's also questioning the kind of assumptions behind them. The hyperbole is like, oh, I'm saying, well, obviously AI can be used for phenomenal good. It's like, okay, what does that look like? Or, what? So it's always asking the question, do I need to use AI for this? So first of it, I'd say the first bit is questioning your own use and maybe challenging other people on it. And then the second thing, you asked me for one, but I think it's
It's all right. Go on.
is then finding the thing that maybe you can do. So you may choose to continue using AI, but is there something that you can do? I guess we've kind of thought about carbon offsets, and there's a lot of challenge towards carbon offsets. But at the same time, sometimes like we have to drive a car or, because we have to feed our family or whatever. It's like, but what else could you do?
I love that.
And the list gives you, kind of lots of ways that you can do that. It is doing something and taking that agency and absolutely refusing to have it taken away.
Yeah, I think those two things are brilliant. What you're saying is that maybe a mythical creature, but maybe we should all be like Luddites from back in the day. That's what I'm hearing from you.
And creativity, we've got creative,
Be
RSA,
creative.
creative people. We need the reimagination. We need
Start a zine.
we need, and there's lots of examples in the resistance. We have a possible futures section, which looks at how people are like using memes to kind of, create alternative narratives and like, create their own language of like, terms like micro slop or, whatever it is. Yeah, small things. Do small things. It doesn't need to
Start
be
your podcast, do your newsletter, but express yourself is basically what we're saying. Claire, over to you. Tania, I want to thank you so much. I'm absolutely wanting to have you back because I think you're amazing. But thank you everybody for listening and for participating. And like the chat was on fire. So thank you so much for that. And stay tuned for the next one. But Claire, it's over to you to wrap it up.
Wow, I was fully immersed. I was in deep there. It was a great chat. Thank you so much, Tania and Christabel, for your energy, insights, your wisdom. Just so the amazing resources. We didn't get to all of the questions because there's so much to dig into. But what I would suggest is we'll send a follow-up email out to everybody who registered. If there's something that's really pressing and you want to dig into it, and we can put you in touch with each other. Tania, you may be getting a lot of people emailing you and just being like, hey, let's just hop on a call. But I'll share websites and links and stuff with everybody who registered, as well as our recording of the event for those unfortunate souls who couldn't make it today for such a wonderful chat. But thank you so much. Hopefully we get to chat again soon, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are in the world and whatever you get up to. And thanks for being here. So nice to see you all. Thank you so much.
See you next time. There will be another.
Thank
See you next time.
you.